Orlando Magic fans, welcome to Utility Sports. Today's video is completely focused and centered on your favorite NBA team, the Orlando Magic, and I think this is a really good time to take a close look at the Orlando Magic. We just finished the regular season. We're heading into the playoffs. Now, unfortunately, the Orlando Magic not back in the postseason this year, but we saw that coming, with the Nikola Vucevic trade. The way this team is positioned, I think they're heading in the right direction long term. And I want to, really preview what I think this could be for the Orlando Magic this offseason. We've got a ton of interesting stuff to talk about in today's video. We're going to talk about this season and more. So if you guys are new to the channel, make sure to leave a like. Also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this one today. I do put a lot of time and effort into these videos, not only preparing them, but also then, of course, recording, editing, doing all of the necessary stuff that is required for these videos. So again, if you do enjoy, please leave a like. It lets me know that you guys are enjoying the content. So let's go ahead and jump forward here now into the video preview. What exactly are we going to talk about in this video? Well, we're going to start with the conclusion of the 2021-2022 season. We'll talk about the record that the Orlando Magic finished with, bright spots for the Orlando Magic this past season. We're also going to talk about some key decisions this team has to make, which NBA draft pick assets they have going into this year's draft. We'll talk about NBA free agency as well, their cap space situation, potential guys they could look to sign. And then we're also going to talk about next season predictions. So let's go ahead and move forward into this past season. We're going to talk about exactly everything I saw, my analysis, thoughts, and conclusion on this year. So they finished 22-60. That was the worst record in the Eastern Conference and the second worst record in the entire NBA, just behind the Houston Rockets. So if you're looking at this realistically, obviously the Magic had a terrible season. When it comes down to winning, losing games, they lost a lot of them. But that's not a bad thing, because Orlando, you have to think about where they were 2, 3, 4 years ago, where they were the perennial 6 to 8 seed in the Eastern Conference, would get bounced out in the first round after a 5 or 6 game series. And then they'd have the 17th pick in the draft or the 16th pick in the draft. And that was not going to be a cycle that ever looked favorably onto Orlando. They were kind of in a realm of mediocrity where they were just stuck there. Nikola Vucevic was good enough to keep them winning. And then, they had the collection of players like DJ Augustine, Terrence Ross. They've had some good players there, but not any players that's going to really, elevate them to the top. And I think one bright spot here to start with is not even listed, but just like the sense of direction finally with this organization, like trading Nikola Vucevic. I know that was last season, but that was huge. I really do think so, because they not only traded him, but they got some good returns on him. They got 2 first-round picks. One of them was Franz Wagner, so we'll actually jump into the bright spots I've listed here. And Franz Wagner was very impressive. He's probably going to be all-rookie first team if I had to guess. Had a ton of 20-plus point games this year. And I think the one thing with him, and I was fairly critical of him coming out of Michigan, but I think he just blended into the NBA better than I expected, specifically as a connector. He works the baseline very well. He's a better passer than I had originally anticipated. And I think he just does a lot of things well. It's not like he's going to be ever a superstar, but I think he's like the perfect 3rd or 4th guy on a team where it's like, if Franz Wagner is your 3rd or 4th best player, you're going to be really, really good. For the Magic this year, I'd probably argue he was their best or 2nd best player. And that's not going to be sustainable, of course. They need to find another big fish out there somewhere. But I think ultimately Wendell Carter is another example of a player that they hit on, because in that Vucevic trade, you see Wagner and Wendell Carter are the biggest returns so far of that trade. And those have been their 2 best players this season. Wendell Carter Jr. was awesome. I loved every little bit of his progression this season. He's starting to knock down threes consistently. Statistically, it doesn't look like he improved that much, but anyone who actually watches the game knows how much better he is. I think he played a lot better this year for Orlando than what he was last year when they even acquired him. So I have seen some good progression. I also do like their coach, Jamal Mosley. I'm a Mavericks fan myself, so Magic fans, I know him pretty well because he was an assistant in Dallas under Rick Carlisle. And I think he's a really good players coach. I think he builds good relationships. And I think the culture and, the direction they're in that franchise now is just way different from what it was historically. And I really do think Orlando is on a good runway that maybe it'll take a couple years, but once they get where they want to go, they could be way better than this team had ever been in the last, 10 years after Dwight Howard had been traded. I also want to talk about Cole Anthony. He was inefficient this year, shot under 40% from the field. A big reason of that is because he does not finish at the rim very well, sub 50%. finishing at the rim, which there's only, I think, 3 players with certain volume that qualify for that. And Cole Anthony was one of them. But the other thing with him, though, is I still think he's a bright spot because he did increase his scoring. He was playing fairly well throughout the season, and he had to take a bigger role with Markelle Fultz out with an injury for a majority of the year. And then once Fultz came back, you're looking at the, kind of interesting dilemma there of, hey, does Fultz get the starting job back? They decided to keep him off the bench. I did like that because Cole Anthony, they're trying to develop him. So with where they drafted him last year, I think they do have something in him, whether it's a bench scorer or, maybe, your third or fourth best player again. I could see that potentially. I just think that, if you're asking him to be your primary scorer, you're probably not going to be a good team. But he did have a nice season for himself. And if he can sharpen his iron a little bit more, sharpen up his tools, I could see Cole Anthony being a pretty good scorer in the NBA. And I just want to talk about the overall youth. When you're a young team, it is very difficult to win games. Winning 22 games with a very, very young team, that's tough to do, especially since now they're going to have players returning from injury who are hopefully going to be way better next season in Markelle Fultz, hopefully, with a little bit of rehab under him. He comes back next year, maybe regains that starting guard spot and just plays really, really well. And then the other thing here is Jonathan Isaac. I don't think people around the NBA really know how good Jonathan Isaac is if you're not specifically watching a lot of Magic games. He is one of the best defensive players I've ever seen play. And what I mean by that is he's one of those few guys that, he's going to be able to average 2 steals, 2 blocks a game. He's a perfect gap defender, but he's also got really good on-ball defensive characteristics, specifically on the perimeter. Now, I don't know if I would trust him against back to the basket centers because I think he's a little like to get washed out there. But for a lot of other bigs, if you have a perimeter outside big, or if you got any guard that you want to throw him on, he's capable to not only disrupt them, but he will literally, change the game with his defensive capabilities. So I think, if Markelle Fultz comes back healthy next season and you have him for a whole year, and then also Jonathan Isaac, if we finally get to see him play, because remember, he hasn't played since the bubble, it would be huge for this Magic team. I think they have a lot of internal pieces that can help this team win more games moving forward. Moving forward into some key decisions to make, and a lot of it has to do with guys that are headed toward free agency. Gary Harris, 27-year-old, he's headed to unrestricted free agency. Of course, they did get him in the Aaron Gordon trade, and I don't really think Gary Harris was a massive part of that deal. I think that was more, salary cap matching there. And for me, I think I'd be okay letting Gary Harris walk just because of how old he is. Yes, he's good and he can help you win games, but at the same time, Orlando, again, this is going to be a multi-year rebuild. They knew it when they traded Vucevic. They knew it when they traded Aaron Gordon. You don't need Gary Harris right now to win games. And realistically, when your team's more ready, he's probably going to be about 30, 31 years old. So he could maybe still help you at that point, but you are going to have to shell out a lot of money to wait that long to have, really meaningful impact. Mo Bamba, on the other hand, he's headed toward restricted free agency, 23 years old, did have a better season. And I think, I don't know if he's ever going to reach the potential that people thought he could have when he came out of the NBA draft. And I understand as to why, there was a lot of projection there with him when they took him. I'm so glad they took the risk on him. They passed in guys like Ntilikina and Dennis Smith Jr. It's not like they really missed anything behind him. Obviously the Donovan Mitchell one hurts a little bit there, but realistically, Donovan Mitchell wasn't going to go in the top 10. He went 13th overall in the draft. So Mo Bamba, not as bad as a miss as I think a lot of other people deem it to be. And at 23 years old, I still think he could play a pretty nice role with this team moving forward. Bol, who they traded for from the Boston Celtics, he's headed toward restricted free agency. I could see them trying to keep him around. He might just take the qualifying offer as well. It's like maybe $2 million. So for me with Bol, I don't really think there's a lot there, but they do have a lot of size and length if they want it. By keeping Bamba and Bol and then also having Wendell Carter Jr., you do have an intriguing, skilled front court with a lot of length and size. I'm just not sure it actually really means that much in terms of wins, especially with how young these guys are. And you look at Robin Lopez, a 34-year-old, didn't really play a ton this year. He's got a really good right jump hook. But for him, I think the biggest thing was his veteran presence on this team. He's headed toward unrestricted free agency. If I were Robin Lopez, I would want to go to a place to try and win. But at the same time, he seems like more of a fun, laid-back dude who's not necessarily super caring about that. I think he just wants to, have a good time, be in the NBA, enjoy himself. And when he does play, I think he plays hard. I think he's a good player. It's just, in Orlando, there's just less reason to give him minutes over some of the young guys that they're trying to develop. Then you also have Iggy Brazdeikis and also Admiral Schofield headed toward restricted free agency. I could see them keeping both of these guys, specifically dependent on if they want to spend money in free agency or not. For me, it doesn't make a ton of sense to, but there are some things to target. So I think for the most part, we're probably going to see them try and keep a lot of these guys and kind of roll back with some of the same groups, see some internal development, and really, focus practice plans around these players. So for me, I think Bamba's back. I could see Bol being back, and I think Brazdeikis for sure is back. Not sure about Schofield. He did get a lot of minutes. I do like Chuma Okeke, though, definitely over Schofield. So, Schofield, I think, is, replaceable if you do lose him. Moving forward to their NBA draft picks, they have their own first round pick this year, their own second round pick this year, and a Pacers second rounder this year. So they have three picks, in the top 35, which is pretty good assets to have. It gives you some flexibility with your own second and your Pacers second there. You could probably move back into the high 20s if you really wanted to, and get a player that you're maybe targeting. So the Magic do have some draft flexibility here. They could go out and make a couple different moves. And it's really going to come down to the lottery, too, for that first round pick there. I do have a lottery video on the channel explaining how the NBA draft lottery works. And it actually shows the specific odds here that the Orlando Magic have to get the first pick, second pick, third pick, fourth pick, fifth pick, and sixth pick, which is the lowest they can select. So the pick's going to be anywhere from 1 to 6. Obviously, Magic fans, you're going to be hoping for pick 1. We'll see exactly how things shake out. So with their pick, again, it's NBA draft lottery dependent. Go check out that video. And the range of the pick is 1 to 6, like I said. So draft targets here. First of all, I'm going to mention Chet Holmgren because it would be a feel-good story if you pair him back up with Jalen Suggs. The two of them were so good together at Minnehaha Academy in Minnesota. But I don't think that really makes the most sense, specifically with where this roster's at. I think Chet Holmgren should probably be the last guy they consider realistically. And then also I have Jabari Smith here, who makes a lot of sense because he's a very smooth shooting 4, who has a very good offensive skill set, but also really fits what this team's trying to do defensively, which is present a lot of length, size, can protect the rim as well as a weak side rim protector. So Jabari Smith does make some sense to me. He's a very good athlete. Of course, had that nice, nasty poster dunk in the NCAA tournament as well. But ultimately, the player I think that probably actually makes the most sense here for Orlando is Paolo Banchero. Now, I think if they're at like pick 2 or pick 1, they would take Jabari Smith over Banchero. But Banchero, I think maybe is the best fit because he's the best half-court scorer as of right now in this draft class. He's very NBA ready with his half-court offensive, skill set. I think he's someone who in the mid-range game is going to be one of the better mid-range scorers in the league. At 6'10", he's very tough to contest. He's got a very high jump shot where he gets the ball up over his head to release it. It's almost unblockable. And he's also someone who has a pretty sneaky good handle. And honestly, to me, would be the best scorer on the Orlando Magic on day 1 of his NBA career. Then we have AJ Griffin here, assuming they fall anywhere from 5 to 6. Of course, knock on wood, I hope that doesn't happen. But for them, if it does, AJ Griffin does make some sense as a 3-point shooter. I think this team just needs to add more shooting around some of their good players like Wendell Carter Jr., Mo Bamba, or also Cole Anthony. If you do have a little bit more spacing around them, I do think efficiency could rise up a little bit as well because there'd be more space to operate. And AJ Griffin, a very good catch and shoot guy. So with really good projectable wingspan, length, physicality. So I do like AJ Griffin, but the player I think is the most up in the air right now, and I want Magic fans' opinion on this, is Jaden Ivey in play, because last year they took Jalen Suggs. They have Cole Anthony, they have Markelle Fultz, they have RJ Hampton. Is Jaden Ivey in play for Orlando? Because realistically, to me, if they drafted him, I think he'd be the best guard on their roster on day 1. I would consider him strongly if I was Orlando. And to be honest, if I got the first overall pick, I would maybe take him if I'm Orlando. Now, I want to know what Magic fans think because you probably have a little bit better feel for this than I do. Would you guys take Jaden Ivey in this year's draft, or is that an automatic no just because he's a guard? Are you dying for a power forward, which I think is probably the biggest need on this team, and Holmgren, Smith, Banchero all fill that, whereas Jaden Ivey, is unlike anyone else in this class in terms of his athleticism, dynamism, ability to get to the rim, playmaking feel. I think he's the best guard in this class. I think he's the best player in this class. And I think with where the NBA is at, I think you need a player like him. And I don't think Orlando has that in Cole Anthony or Markelle Fultz or RJ Hampton or even Jalen Suggs. I think Jalen Suggs is a good combo guard with defensive upside. whereas Jaden Ivey is someone who is, a true on-ball point guard who can facilitate an offense, can get to the rim whenever he wants. So I think Jaden Ivey, I would strongly consider him if I was picking for Orlando. Magic fans, I want your opinion. Would you take him first overall? Let's move forward now into NBA free agency. The Orlando Magic do have an estimated cap space of around $29 million, which is the most in the NBA. So you might be saying to yourself, oh, we could go out and get a big time player. I don't think Orlando's really targeting that. Some of the big time players in this class for free agency don't make the most sense for Orlando. Like Zach LaVine is going to be trying to win if he ever leaves the Bulls, which I don't think he's going to now at this point. But if he was, it was going to be to a team that's trying to contend. Orlando's just not in the running for that. DeAndre Ayton, I just don't know if they're going to try and go out and get a guy like DeAndre Ayton, who, is probably one of the more talented young players in this free agency class. I don't see a way that they really pursue him because of Wendell Carter Jr. I just don't know if that makes the most sense. Then you look at other options. Jalen Brunson. I mean, does Jalen Brunson really move the needle for you? He probably does have a relationship with head coach Jamal Mosley. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but then again, if I'm already questioning whether or not I take Jaden Ivey in the draft, I don't know why I would go out and give a lot of money to Jalen Brunson. He's a 6'1" guard. Yes, he's talented. He's having a really good season with the Dallas Mavericks, but ultimately, for Orlando, I just can't see that being the way to go. And then there's also Colin Sexton, who's a restricted free agent. And I just don't, again, see why they would go and get Colin Sexton, just given the fact they have Cole Anthony and Markelle Fultz and the guards that we've listed already. If you're going to go get one, it would be Jaden Ivey because the long-term projectable upside is way higher. But other than that, it just doesn't really make sense to go sign one like a Colin Sexton, in my opinion. So for me, how are you going to use your salary cap space? Well, there's a few different things they could do, including one that's not listed on here. First of all, the needs I have are power forward and a veteran presence who can also be a contributor. The first option that comes to mind is Ricky Rubio. And you might be wondering, well, you just said we didn't need a bunch of guards. Why would we go sign Ricky Rubio? Look at the impact he had in Cleveland. I do think having a player like him does actually really elevate that guard room and the guard play. Garland, in part, really improved this season because of a clarity of role with Colin Sexton going out. But also, I think Ricky Rubio's presence early in the season did help him a lot. I'm sure throughout training camp that Ricky Rubio did help him learn a whole bunch of things. We also had heard from Garland how Rajon Rondo helped him. So I think, a veteran point guard who's very crafty, understands how the NBA works, but also understands how to manipulate defenses and is one of the best passers in the league. I think having something like that does help Orlando. I think he can also play. To me, he's better than RJ Hampton. If you're looking at the guards that they're going to maybe be losing out on, you do see, a guy like Gary Harris leaving. So it does open up some roster spot minutes for a guy like Ricky Rubio. Then here I have a whole bunch of forwards listed. TJ Warren is really a big upside guy here. If you sign him, he hasn't played since the bubble because of a foot injury. And if you do want to take a risk on him, probably give him a 2-year, $20 million type deal with a team option for that second year. There's very little risk involved in a deal like that. And what you can sell yourself on is, hey, if he plays, he could average 18 points a game for us. And then maybe at the trade deadline, we try and trade him. And that could be a valuable way to pick up an extra asset or two if you're Orlando. Otherwise, if he just fits, he fits, and you keep him and you start winning hopefully some more games and you see some signs of development from your other guys. Thaddeus Young here, of course, I have him listed as well because if you're looking for a power forward, someone who can play alongside bigs, Thaddeus Young's one of those players who can do that. He's got pretty good playmaking feel, pretty good size. He plays physically, pretty solid defender. He's not going to super move the needle for me, but I think if you're just trying to be more competitive, play in some more close games, Thaddeus Young helps you do that. Dwayne Dedmon I have listed because I do think with Robin Lopez out, they're looking for some more veteran presence, specifically a big man who maybe is more stylistically similar to Wendell Carter Jr. as well, where you can run similar system and similar sets because Dwayne Dedmon can shoot the ball to a certain extent. So I do think he makes some sense as well if you can pry him away from Atlanta. And all of these signings, they're not going to be very expensive. You could probably bring in 3 or 4 of these players for that cap space that you have, and then you would still have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception available to you too. So it's possible you could bring in 4 of these guys if you really wanted to. Now, I don't necessarily think that moves the needle too much for Orlando. I don't think there's a need to bring in all 3 or 4 of these guys, but they could. And I think it would be good to, really mentor some of the young guys on this roster. And then you look at Victor Oladipo. Magic fans, you guys know him well. This is another upside signing. Looking at what TJ Warren is, I know the need's not here for Oladipo. It's not that you need him, But again, if he plays well, you give him kind of a spotlight to, showcase what his talent is. Maybe you can trade him to a contender for a couple second-round picks, a low-end protected first-round pick. I mean, very unlikely, but Oladipo is a name that if you have him and he's playing fairly well, I think some people might get interested in trading for him, specifically GMs in search of a bench scorer. Exactly. So Victor Oladipo, an interesting name to watch as well. Ultimately, out of these guys, I think that Thaddeus Young and Ricky Rubio are the ones that make the most sense, just given the direction of Orlando. If you're trying to win more games and be a little bit more, a little bit more tight in games and have a little bit better development for your players, I think Rubio and Thaddeus Young probably help the most. Moving into next season, what I expect to see is Jalen Suggs take a huge step forward. He struggled a ton. He's, really gotten a lot of criticism, and the Magic have drawn a lot of criticism. Don't worry, okay? Suggs is good. Suggs is going to be a good player. It's just going to take him a little bit longer. His offensive skill set wasn't quite where it needed to be when he came out of the draft. I was fully aware of all of this when I evaluated him. I knew he wasn't going to be a great offensive player on day one, and I think a lot of people assumed he was. I think getting Jonathan Isaac is going to be huge as well for Jalen Suggs, because it's going to give you some more transition opportunities, and that's where Suggs is really best. And you're going to see some consistent incremental development. If every single player gets a little bit better, it ends up having a big impact on how good this team is. So you have to take it day by day here if you're Orlando. And you have to have a nice long-term approach with it as well, saying, hey, we're probably not going to win 40 games next year. That's okay. This is part of my honesty hour here. I don't think the Magic are going to be good next year. I think they're going to be about, 15th to 13th in the East, that kind of range, which is okay. That means you're probably going to be in line for another top pick. You also have Chicago's first rounder next year as well. And you're going to hope that, Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan take a little bit of a step back as well for them. And maybe the Bulls don't have quite the season they're hoping for, because realistically here, if you're Orlando, going into not only this draft with a high first, but then next draft as well with another high first and then a second first rounder, you can really add to this roster and improve what you have on this team. And Jonathan Isaac's return does change a lot of stuff. When you go from a solid defense, which is what Orlando was this year, to a good team defense, it does make a world of difference in terms of how good your offense can be, because you're going to get more fast break points. You're going to get more transition opportunities, and teams are just going to hate playing you. If you are a pesty defensive team that, can really, aggravate other teams, it makes the offensive side of the court way easier to play on if you're consistently getting stops. Having to take the ball out of the hoop and inbound it from the baseline does have a lot of demoralization to it when you're going throughout the duration of a game. I think it's going to be very important here for Orlando that they do try and improve their overall team this year. Even if it doesn't mean a lot of winning, I just want to see improvement, and I think Orlando is in line to do that next season. Hopefully, Magic fans, you have enjoyed the video today. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to go check out some of our other offseason previews. Also, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on that notification bell, and we'll catch you guys in the very next Utility Sports video.